We love Las Vegas food and for years have been covering the exciting developments in the city's diverse dining scene. The culinary offerings in Las Vegas span cuisines, styles, and budgets, with restaurants from some of the most recognizable culinary figures in popular culture, including Wolfgang Puck, Bobby Flay, Giada De Laurentiis, and Guy Fieri. We recently took a break from our usual programming to highlight an exciting and diverse lineup of Las Vegas chefs and restaurants. We've chatted with the biggest names as well as some rising stars who will be appearing on the marquee for years to come. Check out these really cool episodes in the This Is Taste podcast feed.
I find a lot of food writers, coffee is like a third rail. They're afraid to say the wrong thing. They don't know how to talk about it. And I think as all these, new brands proliferate, it's sort of how do you know? You can't just go to Reddit.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. Tony Konecny is on the show today, and we talk about the coffee company he founded with Sumi Ali. It's called Yes Please, and if you've listened to the show, you know how much I love the company and what Tony and Sumi have built over the years. The bag itself is part of our logo of this very podcast, which tells you how much I love it. On this episode, we talk about how Yes Please is bringing exceptional blends and single origin coffees to subscribers each week. It's a really smart business model, and we get into how it all works and how in the end, it's the coffee fans that win. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with one of the leading voices in all of coffee. Welcome to This Is Taste. How are you, man?
I'm really happy to be here. It's great to see you again.
It's great to see you, too. And I'm so thrilled we're in LA and I'm able to have a conversation with you again. I'm going to link to our first conversation in the show notes, which was in 2018 when Yes Please was really in your single digits for the releases. And I'm, on record. I'm such a fan of you and what Sumi Ali have done and built at Yes
that.
Please. You're welcome. And you're part of our logo for a reason. This is Taste. You guys really not just ambassadors for coffee and just really cool and creative people, but week after week, you're making the best coffee and I'm making it at home and I get a lot of coffee sent to me. I buy a lot of coffee and man, yours is my favorite. So hi.
That's great. Well, it was great to be here.
The end. No.
You've been a champion of us since our earliest days.
It's easy. Let's talk about what Yes Please is, just for our audience, and how your very unique subscription model works. I think it's really special.
Yeah. So Yes Please is kind of the sequel to my previous coffee startup, Tonx Coffee. Yep. Which started in 2011, was acquired by Blue Bottle in 2014. And the premise there was that nobody in our sort of category of third wave coffee was really focusing on the home user, that the best roasting companies, the ones that were doing the most interesting sourcing, had the most sophisticated roasting programs, that if you looked under the hood, most of those beans were going to wholesale channels, to grocery shelves, to restaurants, to other cafes. And the ones that were staying in-house, where we had some sort of relationship with the customer, most of that was going to make beverages. So the person who actually bought a bag of the beans, took them home, made coffee themselves, who I would think are, have the highest potential to be connoisseurs of coffee.
They're putting in the work required.
Right. They're making the investment. They're touching the coffee, day after day after day. And I just felt like we weren't optimizing for them, that they were kind of an afterthought compared to, what the baristas were doing and what the shops were doing and the beverages and the training programs and the sales teams. And so it was kind of, e-commerce made sense. And I think for coffee in particular, which is best enjoyed fresh, that the idea of home delivery for coffee it kind of makes tremendous sense. So yeah, kind of the thought was, how do you build a coffee company from the ground up that doesn't, and no pun intended, that doesn't sort of make all the compromises that you see all these leading roasting companies inevitably fall into, and just really focus on delivering the best possible product consistently to the home customer. And, we were starting it out of the trunk of a car. We'd raised venture capital. We were on this sort of train that kind of, I think, all roads inevitably led to, we either needed to raise a tremendous amount of money on a crazy valuation to continue growing the business, which was growing at a good clip, or we were looking at selling the business. And reluctantly, I think we sold the business, and there are a lot of lessons for that.
Yeah.
It could be a whole podcast episode. But so Yes Please is kind of the
sequel.
The non-compete ran out. Sumi and I, Sumi was apprentice roaster in the Tonx days, and we'd known each other for a while before that, and I always knew he had the gift of tasting coffee, made an excellent roaster, and we knew we wanted to do something together. And then the opportunity came to work with Roy Choi and Daniel Patterson on Local, the restaurant concept.
That was your first entry into coffee for Yes Please? Was those coffees you're doing at Local, which I think the big idea there was to do $1 cup of coffee, right?
$1 cup of coffee. I'm sure the previous episode we probably explored that in depth.
We did. We won't go into that exactly.
It was a bit of controversy, but we discovered through doing that Tonx coffee had been predicated on a new single origin coffee every 2 weeks, and doing this sort of forecasting and inventory juggling to make that work successfully was extraordinary. And I, not to digress into kind of, old man in the rocking chair talk, but, when I started roasting 20 some years ago, God help me, blends were everything.
Yeah.
And espresso was everything in Seattle in the early 2000s. And so, I cut my teeth doing an espresso blend that was 7 beans, 8 beans, all individually roasted, the proportions changing, very granular.
They call that dialing in the business. You're dialing coffees and roasts. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a great experience. And, there was no sort of, we were all kind of winging it. I think everybody in coffee in that era. And it just felt like that was, an interesting culinary landscape of how do you sort of, make the best end experience. And then, the pendulum kind of swung towards this, what I would call like single origin puritanism, where, we want the most authentic experience, the terroir. We want to know the name of the farmer. We want, for a lot of very good, deep reasons. And I think now it's kind of, we're in this place where, shouldn't we mess around with blending again? And so with the local
this is how many years ago?
That was 2017. I think was probably when we were doing that. 2016.
When the epiphany that, hey, we should think about blends again. We've done single origin so well. There's a lot of challenge to do single origin for subscription.
Yeah, and I think the way that our little manifesto was that I think the way that a lot of coffee roasters approach blends is as kind of a dumbed down version for a certain kind of customer, or it's the bargain bin, or it's the place where certain types of coffees can go, and it's not really seen as like, this is what we lead with. This is like our culinary expression. And the central conceit that we kind of put our flag in with Yes Please is that there's no single origin coffee, no matter how good, that you couldn't make a little bit better always by blending it with some other coffee. And that's like
radical.
It's a heresy.
It is.
But if you think about it for like 2 minutes, it's obviously true.
Yeah.
Now there are reasons why you might not want to do that I think are totally valid.
I love this idea, and we can get into the fact that you actually do sell single origins now on Yes Please. You do decaf, and you kind of your subscription is not only blends, but the idea of blending to make the most excellent, the best, the sweetest coffee around, and not being tied to the single origin is radical. And I have to ask, like, when you're actually cupping with Sumi and your team, how does that process work exactly? Because you are releasing weekly, and that's a grind, haha, pun intended, that we don't acknowledge that much when you're thinking about other coffees which are released maybe quarterly, maybe monthly, but you're doing weekly drops. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it also affords us a different kind of freedom that as a green coffee buyer, I can just buy anything that I like that catches my eye, if there's room for it somewhere in the calendar, and I don't have to be too strict about that.
Yeah.
So if there's a great micro lot that there's only 24 kilos of, great, I'll snatch it up. There's another coffee that like there's 20 bags, 2 pallets of, like, that we want to contract, we'll take that coffee. And it just allows us to say yes to anything good that crosses our plate without the need to say, look, we need this much coffee from Nicaragua for this part of the year, and that's going to fill one of the SKUs in our offering list. And
one of these blends that is well regarded and like a tentpole blend, like Panorama, you could say. I mean, there was like, you could name any coffee company and they have one that's everyone knows. You don't have to be stuck in that world.
Right. Yeah, we have a lot of freedom. So I think, the first thing kind of people are concerned about, I think, is like, oh, well, this is, it's going to change every week. Am I going to have to dial it in? And, I think our experience is that, we always hew to a certain strategy around how the coffee is going to perform and how it's going to be balanced. And, we always disclose all of the coffees and the producers that go into each blend. And
it's so interesting I keep my ratios the same. I lock and then I just go with you guys, and it's like 7 out of 8 are like perfect, and maybe 1 is like not exactly my favorite in terms of sweetness. Maybe there's a little bit of astringency. Could be also my water. It could be also me, like extraction times and all that stuff.
Right. But yeah, I think if you're in a situation as a home barista where, every coffee you bring in requires you to make massive grind adjustments or change your water temperature or research a new pouring technique or what, that to me is, you're making a hobby out of something that like at a baseline should be just kind of a just add water, easy situation.
Are you, as a green buyer, are you checking out origin? Are you getting to go? And the other question is like, one thing I want our listeners to realize, if you're this far, you're kind of into coffee, there's a real seasonality element of coffee. There's seasons, and we don't think about them with these general blends. But of course, with Yes Please, you're getting your East Africans at a certain time. You're getting your Central Americans at a certain time.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not traveling. I don't leave Los Angeles anymore. Like,
why would you? It's a great place.
It's a great place. And I mean, part of the absurdity of our model is, something I don't think I fully understood when I signed up for this mission 6 years ago, is that changing this every week is kind of, it's taking time off is hard. So, and at the scale we're at, it doesn't make sense. I mean, the landscape now is that, what we would have called direct trade 10 years ago is, getting an Instagram DM from a farmer who's like, hey, can I send you samples?
Yeah.
So
it probably still happens sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. The landscape is different.
Can we talk about the state of coffee IQ? I think you're really well positioned to answer this, because you have subscribers, and you have customers, and you have an inbox, and you have social accounts. And what are your subscribers telling you right now? And do you feel that there is a growing audience for home baristas who are embracing specialty coffee, specifically really tasting the coffee and realizing what they're tasting and what they like?
I think that the biggest change is that there's the explosion of good home coffee equipment. I mean, we can talk espresso just as a category. Home espresso machines have gotten cheaper, better, more ubiquitous. YouTube has revolutionized what the learning curve is like for home espresso. I think at this point, there are home baristas who, would slaughter in a barista competition now. I'm excited to see the conversation move away from kind of the gear and the toys into the beans and the coffee, and see what impact that will have on the way
Yeah.
consumers approach espresso, because I think right now it's still being led by people in the industry. And, peering behind the curtain, I don't think there's a lot of exciting things going on in espresso in
Yeah.
terms of what the potential is.
Yeah.
Most roasters kind of think of their espresso blend as like a meat and potatoes workhorse thing.
Yeah.
And
Consistent margin, not as artistic in a way in the roasting style.
yeah,
Not expressing origin as much, obviously.
Yeah. So I think there's room for more dialogue between this emerging home barista universe and roasters that are doing cool stuff. But just in terms of grinders, Fellow being a $100 million plus a year sales business for, when they first launched their pouring kettle, I'm like, who is going to buy a $240 electric kettle? But that's a huge business. There's clearly an appetite.
A lot of boutique hotels in this country, I must say, Tony. A lot of boutique hotels got that Fellow in their room, sitting there.
Yeah,
I'm joking, but that's clearly a model. If you can get an item that can be in a hotel room, that's the coveted item. There's a lot of hotel rooms in our country.
Yeah, I think very design forward and approachable for people and worth the investment. And so I think I'm much more comfortable. I think for your audience, for people that listen to the show, if you have a Keurig machine or an espresso machine in your kitchen, but you're also the sort of person who knows how to season your cast iron pan, you should upgrade. Drop that machine on Facebook Marketplace. Get a Baratza Encore. Get a nice kettle. You can make coffee at home. It's not hard.
Get to an Ascali scale for $19. Get a Chemex. Get a V60.
Yep.
Yeah. Get that Encore. That's mine of choice. I love that one.
Yeah.
Because you do it every day. Sometimes multiple times a day.
Yeah.
We don't think about that, but coffee is part of our rituals in life, and to not think about it in the same way we think about a lot of parts of our body and health and all sorts of our lives is a real misread, I think, of priorities.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that is fascinating about coffee is we still sort of think of it a little bit as a vice. It's not, it doesn't have nutritional value. It's you do it because it's a drug. And I kind of like to lean into that vice aspect of it, that it's hedonism.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways to get caffeine. If you need caffeine in your morning, there are probably easier ways than making a great cup of coffee or require less investment than having good coffee. But the pleasure of that, obviously that's, it's my life revolves around coffee, but I've 20 some years in this business, and I get extreme pleasure and joy out of every coffee I drink every morning. It's always the best part of my day.
Tony, let me ask you, what's the biggest disservice to coffee right now? This could be from an external force. It could be from the industry itself. It could be from trend. It could be from misinformation. I feel like there's probably some headwinds in coffee that you could spell out.
Yeah. I think, my answer to that for the longest time was that a lot of us kind of in this, vanguard world of third wave coffee, whatever you want to call it, we end up creating the perception that good coffee has to be elevated to a hobby. You need all this fancy equipment that it requires, this sort of, you got to fly to Japan and learn the right pouring technique or something. And it's a lot of these kind of false signifiers that I think we adopted in the early part of third wave coffee because we wanted to distinguish ourselves from the Starbucks and the chains and the sort of commercial coffee.
You needed to be overt.
Yeah.
Very overt and very intentional.
But at the same time, I think it created this perception that, this is, you're paying how much for a cup of coffee? And they're, it got dressed up in all of these trappings of kind of culinary burlesque and it lost its sort of blue collar roots that I kind of always use the analogy that craft beer exploded on the scene. And, I in the 90s, I was a beer snob. By the mid 2000s, I was just a normal craft beer enthusiast because the snobbery was gone. And the people that were making the beer, the people that were serving the beer, the places that you went and enjoyed those beers were very egalitarian. And I think in coffee, it was kind of, we elevated the barista, we elevated the machinery, the opulence of the experience in order to try to distinguish our product. But we weren't really charging that much more than what Starbucks was charging for a similar drink.
No.
But our margins were very different. The labor that we put into it was very different. The technical skill and the roasting and the freshness was all exceptional. So I think we kind of trained consumers to look at these other signifiers and not really understand that, coffee is simple. There's things that separate good from bad, shit from shinola, and I don't think we did a great job of kind of empowering consumers to be like, actually, you can do this at home.
But we've evolved beyond that. And Yes Please is a big part of that evolution. And better coffee is more quote unquote affordable. We understand that they're a $7 cup of coffee. There's a reason for it, and we don't complain as much. There's very few people who complain that there isn't dollar coffee in this world. Like 10 years ago, everyone thought coffee should be $1. But there's probably other headwinds. And I want to get your take on what the real headwinds are now, that the next hurdle and challenges for especially coffee to grow.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it from the perspective of, Yes Please as a business in a competitive landscape, like I think that the tailwind, that the pandemic was clearly a tailwind for home coffee consumption, that people who were hooked on the good stuff like quickly figured out, hey, I should probably try to figure out a way to do this at home.
Yeah.
And I think that was, a boon for all of these, coffee equipment companies. And I mean, you can just see it in terms of on every time you open up Amazon and look at coffee grinders, there's, knockoffs coming out of China that are a quarter the price.
Yeah.
It's
let alone knockoff filters and
right
pour over devices.
Yeah. I mean, hand grinders. It's the proliferation is I can't keep up with it, and it's wonderful. But I think it also led to, coffee's always as a business, I think, the quote unquote industry is really about minting new entrepreneurs into the coffee space. And I think for a lot of people, coffee shop is the kind of, lemonade stand of business plans. And you've got a lot of people who, they lost their big tech job, or they, want to make a career change or whatever. And their dream is to open a coffee shop, or their dream is to launch a brand, and they have a passion for branding, and coffee just seems like the thing to apply it to. So I think now we've got this proliferation of, celebrity influencer coffee brands, and sort of, new shops that, run by people who don't necessarily have experience in food service
also,
or
the
retail,
coffee
or
can be quite terrible and undrinkable. In
right,
some of these,
but in beautiful packages.
Well, of course, wonderful. You can even get it in like a non-traditional package, like a VHS case or a beaker from a lab.
Right.
They're doing every trick here now.
And I mean, I'm envious of some of that. Some of that's really cool, but I think it's also a little garish to, put more money into the packaging than you're putting into the green coffee that's wasted to go in there. And I think, especially for a product that really should only live in its packaging for a couple weeks at most, that
it's a little
sort of goes, it's a utilitarian thing.
It's utilitarian. It's a little counterintuitive to spend that much on packaging. Yeah.
One of the things that distinguishes you is that you're a food generalist who is very comfortable talking to people in coffee and talking about coffee. And I find a lot of food writers, coffee is like a third rail. They're afraid to say the wrong thing. They don't know how to talk about it. They're concerned that they're not and I think as all these new brands proliferate, it's sort of how do you know? You can't just go to Reddit and see what people are recommending. I mean, there's no good
Reddit's probably the closest you're going to get. I mean, you're not really, I think what Jordan and team does at Sprudge is remarkable, but certainly they can't cover every coffee company, and they're certainly not doing reviews.
Right. I mean, Sprudge, especially for if you're traveling, is
for
I mean, any of our customers who write in who are like, I'm going to Philadelphia, where should I go?
Sprudge is always
search Sprudge. Like,
yep.
Their coverage of shops and roasters is fantastic. But yeah, I think for consumers that are just getting into it, I think it can seem like, this this brand had all the signifiers, this thing that was at the grocery store, like it fit the mode of what I thought I'm supposed to be looking for in this niche, and I was disappointed by it. Or maybe I brewed it wrong, or maybe maybe I just don't like coffee as much as those people do because I don't get it. I don't taste the things that it says I'm supposed to taste.
Well, we can get into tasting notes in detail at some other point. I mean, tasting notes, I feel, is like the biggest crime against coffee is telling a drinker that you need to have bergamot in your mouth, or you're not tasting the coffee correctly. Like, that can go fuck off. Like, I'm sorry to
100%.
use the language, but you should be buying coffee from places like Yes Please, places like Say, places like Camber, who are just excellent roasters and don't need to have this like bells and whistles of these tasting notes. Sorry, I went on a little bit.
No, I agree. I mean, I've started, especially with our single origins, I'm including more tasting notes because customers are asking for them. But man, I tread very lightly with that because I don't want to be overly prescriptive, and I don't want to sort of tell people that like you're
exclusive.
You're tasting it wrong.
You're tasting it wrong.
You're brewing it wrong.
You're setting up.
If you can't get the grapefruit out of this coffee.
Grapefruit, yeah. You can't get the tar out of the coffee. Sorry, that was a little bit of a rant. Apologies, listener. What's good in LA right now, cafe wise? I mean, I've did a panel once with a bunch of LA baristas, and it was awesome. And I just think LA is like the best town for coffee. It's so great on the cafe side. Yeah,
I agree. I think. Yeah, LA is a vibrant coffee city. I think my favorite shops right now. I mean, I don't know if you've been to Hooked, Venice.
No,
Nicely's.
Is it Nicely's the place? I haven't been out there yet.
That's I just love the vibe there.
Yeah.
It's like one man band in the mornings with Nicely and
Nicely Able, great guy. He was on that panel that I mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm that's enough to get me to drive out to the west side.
Yeah.
And and he's multi-roaster. He's doing exclusively like natural and unusual processed coffees, which are not always my cup of tea.
No.
But
me either.
I believe in Nicely's vision, and his execution is always perfect. Around my part of town, I go to Dayglow a lot.
Of course, I was just there on Saturday. Yeah,
and
good place.
Kumquat.
Yep.
I'm
glad, Tony, you're like validating some of my spots. I love Kumquat. I thought it was a great cafe experience. I thought Dayglow, just as a multi-roaster, is beautiful selection.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we may have talked about this before, but I kind of felt in the early days of multi-roaster shops that this was not doing a great service to the coffee, that you were kind of throwing baristas all these curveballs, and I'm not going to name names, but there was a prominent multi-roaster shop where I would go in and frequently order espresso, and I'd ask them what they were serving, and the barista who pulled the shot didn't know what was in the hopper, didn't know who the roaster was or what the coffee was, and that's like, okay, why bother to be multi-roaster at that point if no one's going to care enough to dial in the coffee? But I think places like Dayglow and Kumquat have kind of changed my tune about that. I have mixed feelings about being able to frequently taste coffees from overseas, roasted overseas, that there's a lot of European and Asian roasters represented here now in LA, which is
carbon footprint.
More just, I mean, it feels a little unfair that we have a thriving, sometimes struggling micro roaster scene in the United States.
Yeah.
And, a lot of these Scandinavian companies, they get, government supports export of their goods, and, and they have universal health care and a lot of advantages that roasters don't have in the United States.
Support local, support American. I mean, that's a loaded thing, but
it's a loaded thing. But also,
that's what we're talking about.
Fritz just did a little pop up at Squirrel a couple weeks ago, and that was great. Like, I loved being able to have that experience and direct from the people that make that.
Was
coffee.
the team there from Fritz?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they were. It was kind of a stop off on their way to Costa Rica. So.
I'm happy. BT, is it?
I believe so.
BT. Yeah. He's in our book Korea World, and I have to segue. And we have a large, or not large, but relatively large coffee section in our cookbook. And I have to say, you mentioned Japan as like an example of exquisite coffees, but I have to say, Korea is better.
Yeah.
And the progressive roasting in Korea and the cafes there, please, if you're listening to this from the industry, please go to Korea, drink Mesh, drink Fritz, drink around the city. It's exceptional. I just think there isn't a lot of coverage about cafes in Seoul.
Great. So can I tag along on one of your trips?
Please, Tony.
Like you would be the ultimate guide for me.
I would love to go with you. I would love to send you Rex. I have a great piece I wrote about some of the cafes I like. And I just have to say Korean coffee is incredible right now.
Yeah.
So you brought up Fritz, so it was really, really cool. Let's talk about how you and Sumi Ali work. Sumi is your partner in roasting and in the business, and Sumi will be on the show at some point. How do you collab on each of these releases each week? It's so many releases. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, Sumi and Aaron Raymaker is our head roaster,
and Aaron too, of course. Yep.
Yeah, so we come from the cup everything we ever roast school of thought. And we do this thing called cup blending, which I think is should be more common, but isn't.
I don't know that term.
Or wet blending. The idea is that once you have everything on the cupping table and you're slurping spoonfuls of different coffees, it's fairly easy to then take, well, what happens if you do 2 spoonfuls of this coffee with 1 spoonful of this coffee with 1 spoonful of that coffee, just with the cupping liquid, and that is revelatory for how coffees work together or don't work together or clash, or and you learn all sorts of unexpected things.
Never would have thought that actually translated.
It translates incredibly well, and it's fast and easy. And at this point, I think there's just, if you have a big cupping table with a lot of different coffees on it, talking to any coffee professionals that are listening out there, I urge you to just, like, before you clear the table, like, do a little cup blending. It's easy, it takes no effort, and you will learn something every single time.
So cool. And we really have been void of talking about origin, and we've had very few country names, which I think is my fault for not going in that direction. And when you're thinking about seasonality, about the way that coffee comes in, on a quarterly basis, and do you like origins naturally fit together, and do you have like default percentages by origin, by country?
I wouldn't say it's quite that specific, but there's definitely some tropes in terms of what coffees work together, or what flavors from certain coffees. Like they're washed Ethiopias will generally give you a certain set of flavors that are kind of like resonant berry, like on the edges. Mm-hmm. And we find that, even like blending down to like 20%, 15% on one of those coffees, some of those flavors will still punch through as if it were half the blend. So you kind of like work out like, oh, well, I can always like anchor a coffee like that and a blend. And then, there's kind of our, what we would call like our glazed donut chocolate chip cookie kind of coffees, like a washed Huehuetenango, Guatemala. Like I will always go to bat for
washed
centrals. And
centrals are, that's an absolute specific coffee.
Yeah.
Glazed donut. I think Jeff Watts once called it like coffee. Yeah. The flavor of coffee.
And I mean, to my mind, like, I think people don't champion those coffees enough. And they're, to me, I would give me a nice 88 point, 89 point washed Guatemala over, any sort of fruit bomb crazy experimental process.
We like different, we want strong flavors as a culture. So that's
or I think it's this kind of homework assignment mentality of like coffee connoisseurship, where like you need to explore the landscape, you need to try every variety, every process, every the kind of FOMO of and I get that. That's super compelling, and I'm not immune to it, but like in terms of what I want to buy a bag of, sitting on my kitchen counter and brew every morning for a week or two. Like it's not those crazy weird coffees anymore.
Yeah. Fascinating. I really want to have you back and talk about more of the subtleties of blending. I feel I'd love to get into a longer conversation about that, because blending is so fascinating, how you make it all work together. Because like you obviously, in lesser hands, blends can be aggressively bad.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is, blends are built by finance departments and
Before we get to the last section, I want to ask you, you launched with content being a really big part of Yes Please. You launched the newspaper. You had various iterations of content, and just like love that, Tony. Like the fact that you were putting out journalism in addition to what we just talked about was amazing. And you still, to this day, write a newsletter for every release, and I love it. So, what do you think about with your content?
It's I think year one publishing a full on weekly print zine with a full team was premature.
It was amazing. It's what I would have done if I would have had that opportunity.
Yeah, it was always my dream, and I just kind of indulged it to the detriment of my bank account, and and yeah, now I think we've kind of found the right place. I've turned my living room into a risograph print studio, and so I do everything in house, all the stickers, all the inserts,
so
and it's the hobby part of the business, and I love it. But it's I'd love to expand it. I'd love to kind of
keep doing
scratch
what you're doing.
the itch.
I read it.
Deeper,
I hope people read. Do you get feedback? Do people read the stuff?
Yeah, it's great, and it definitely. I mean, what I try to do with that is I really encourage people to like write in and be casual, and that's more than kind of. I mean, there's a lot of e-commerce best practices around surveys and reviews and stuff that frankly we should lean more into and do more of, and kind of be professional in that arena. But it's so much nicer to kind of have this like real human connection with our customers. And, and I always said this from like the earliest days of when we were doing Tonx Coffee, that we knew more in the first 3 months of running that business about how people were brewing coffee at home than most of the teams at Intelligentsia or Stumptown or Blue Bottle knew about like what people were doing with the beans that they were buying. So it feels like that's that's where I want to be. We're just starting to dabble in wholesaling to multi-roaster shops to kind of put our bags on retail shelves
I was wondering.
those places. It's I'm reluctant, but I think I've come around so much on feeling like. I mean, the multi-roaster shops are much better at selling beans than individual roaster retailers have been. Dayglow, Kumquat, those shops move a lot of beans.
Drip in New York, you have to talk to those guys.
Drip, I love
Nigel
those guys.
Is amazing,
Yeah, so I'll definitely reach out.
I should connect you. I talked to Nigel about that. Yes, please should be in New York on that shelf.
Yeah, that would be great. Because, I think those shops are like genuine curators and ambassadors, and I feel like that curation, those arbiters of taste, journalists who will talk about coffee. It's a rare and special thing, and I think those of us that are kind of really trying to do something unique or difficult or special in coffee, like need to kind of recognize and embrace the influencers, the ambassadors, the shops that actually are trying to.
It's mutual, and I think that there's a wave. Absolute wave of interest in coffee from a younger generation as NA grows, as our monoculture dissolves into specific niche. Coffee is going to be something that people are going to be investing in, and such an affordable luxury.
Yeah,
I say it time and again with all the coffee interviews. So I love it. I love what you do. On This Is Taste, I ask guests about their discerning taste. So to close this interview, here's a little rapid fire, fast and furious taste check. Tony, are you ready?
I'm going to try to be ready.
The best fruit?
Loquats.
Tell me about those.
So they grow all over. I live in Echo Park. They grow all over Los Angeles, and particularly in my neighborhood. The trees are abundant. Very few people seem to pick them or eat them. And every tree is slightly different in flavor. And so, it's like I'm a forager at heart.
It sounds like you're talking about coffee here.
Yeah.
Like wildly grown coffee in Ethiopia, like that. So the worst vegetable.
Sunchokes, Jerusalem artichoke.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't digest them.
Yeah. If you get it raw at the wrong time, you got an interesting evening ahead of you.
Bad scene, yep.
The best dessert?
I think that would be the black sesame xiaolongbao at Din Tai Fung.
Oh yeah, never had that.
It was an off menu item. I think they've now made it an official item, but it has like mochi wrapping in it now additionally, which is great. But I kind of like the original.
Does it have a liquid center?
Like a molten black sesame center. Yeah,
amazing. I don't know what that is.
It's fantastic.
Your favorite American fast food chain?
Does Waffle House count as fast food?
It does.
Then Waffle House.
Wow.
By a mile.
I love that call. What a choice. Some may call it Awful House, but not you.
No, I love every aspect of every experience of every Waffle House I've been in.
Your favorite LA restaurant?
Quarter Sheets right now.
Dude.
I know you were just there. That princess cake, man.
It's just had Aaron in doing an interview about that,
Awesome.
about those pies.
Yeah. I'm there's great pizza in LA and I know you and Phil talked about that, but I think that and maybe Shin's Pizza and Cypress Park, the celery salad there is like my favorite.
That's such
thing.
Give you a celery salad tip. Have you been to Stir Crazy?
No.
They have a great celery salad with hard cheese that is definitely on my top list of the year so far.
Okay, noted.
Stir Crazy, remember that name. A couple more. Your favorite coffee bar in the world?
Okay, that would be a tie between two coffee bars, neither of which exist anymore. There's the original Espresso Vivace sidewalk stand in Seattle that the baristas that work there for decades. Wow. And that was kind of, a transformative experience, 20 some years ago for me. And then Choke Moped Shop, when it was open here in town, when we were opening the first Intelligentsia here in Silver Lake, it was, one guy, Jeff Johnson, and his crappy espresso machine in a moped repair shop.
Yeah.
And it was just the vibes there were just immaculate. And
mopeds and coffee. I love that. There's one in Michigan that I go to in Kalamazoo that has like a little crossover. I love that. I love that vibe. A few more. Your favorite cookbook of all time?
Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat.
Your favorite city outside America to visit for food?
Frankly, I'm not that well traveled,
right? Because you're making coffee. You're roasting coffee, and why would you leave LA?
Yeah, I mean, there's experiences. I feel like the last time I was in Guatemala, like roadside tamales in the middle of nowhere, Huehuetenango dirt road. That was epic. But
you love LA. This is amazing.
Yeah, it all comes here. I mean, I'd like to go through another travel phase in my life, but LA, everything comes here.
As a green buyer, you got to see a lot of places, so. You're happy to be home.
Yeah, the itch is strong. The pandemic has made the itch strong.
Yeah,
I'm ready to be on the road again.
A cuisine you would like to learn more about?
I think Middle Eastern cuisine in general is. I mean, I would feel like it's underrepresented. That at least I haven't explored it deeply enough, and I know it hits the spot for me. So
absolutely. Last one, your favorite sandwich?
That would be the Ira Glass at Wax Paper in Frogtown.
Fun name.
Bub and Grandma's bread with like sprouts and cheddar cheese and avocado. And it's simple, but it scratches an itch.
The hippie sandwich lives.
Yeah, a fantastic version of the hippie sandwich.
I love
Nothing
that.
else scratches that itch.
Tony, thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
And my pleasure.
This Is Taste is hosted by Eliza Abarbanel and me, Matt Rodbard. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things that are happening.